Your second to last Insight Lab before break. We're going to be talking about personalization in the mobile experience. I'm Bina. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for iProspect US. And so some of the experiences and the case studies that you'll see in this deck are related to some of the compelling personalized experiences that we've provided to our brands.
And I'm Gosha Khuchua. I'm the managing partner over at Fetch. Fetch is a sister agency to iProspect, and we specialize in marketing to a mobile-first consumer. And so today, we're going to talk to you a little bit about how to make a perfect espresso. Dana will share some tips on how to cook a great pizza. And in all of this, we hope to have you take 3 key takeaways about marketing in mobile. First, it's cracking that first screen challenge. We'll talk quite a bit about this and explain what this means. It's also going to be about personalizing based on intent signals, quite a key concept through today's presentation. And finally, it's providing the ingredients for that awesome mobile-first experience. Before we dive into all of this, though, I'll ask you guys to think back to this morning when you all woke up. How many of you reached for your mobile phone within the first 5 minutes of actually waking up? Signs of the times. I would also venture a guess that most of you did more than just mute your alarm clock. You probably also scrolled through your emails, maybe respond to some text messages, checked out your social feeds. We all do this, right? And so if we think about this, if we think about how we interact with our phones, it's the first device we pick up in the morning. It's the device we turn to throughout the course of the day. It's usually the last device or even like the last thing we interact with before we go to sleep. That's pretty powerful. But phones, they're not just devices. They're also marketing mediums, right? We all know this. And so imagine all the opportunity that we have to be as brands, the first ones to say good morning to a consumer, to be there to answer their questions throughout the course of the day and address their needs, to entertain, surprise, delight them as they unwind towards the end of the day. Those are powerful moments that we should be able to leverage and turn them into amazing experiences that our brands can benefit from. We're all performance marketers here, and I think we know this, and it's because of this that we are probably frustrated by this number, right? That the majority of the media spend still goes to traditional advertising, traditional channels. And even in the 30% that is allocated towards digital, it's the vast minority that goes towards mobile-specific initiatives. And why? Why does this happen? And I think it's because it's hard. It's hard to market on mobile. It's hard to actually reach that consumer with and deliver to them the right level of experience, given all of the different intent signals that you have to pick up. Traditional advertising relies on a one-to-many approach, right? You take one piece of content, you blast it out, hope it sticks, create some positive vibes. Digital actually gets a little bit closer, right? It's one to few, one to fewer. You're talking about cohorts, lookalike models and audiences and that sort of thing. But mobile is one-to-one. It's the most intimate device that we have. And consumers are telling us that they want those personalized experiences, that they demand that. It's table stakes at this point. If you combine this stat with the fact that Google tells us that 96%, almost every single person in this country, turns to their mobile phone to answer a question, the opportunity there for us is immense, right? How do you actually translate all of those signals, pick up the consumer's need state, and then provide them the right answer? Jeremy Kornfield, in his opening remarks yesterday, said that the role of search is to acknowledge the question the consumer is asking. Tell them, hey, I hear you, come through my front door, and let's have a conversation and find an answer for you. It's partially true for mobile as well because we do those searches and we provide that level of intent, but we send so many other signals that indicate that we have a need, that we have a question that we need answered. And so it's our job as marketers to figure out how to harness them, translate them, and action them in real time that mobile demands in order to get there. And in order to get there, we have quite a bit of work still to do. We have to figure out our ad tech. I'm not saying take everything you have now and throw it away, not at all. But how do you intelligently add to your existing advertising infrastructure in order to be able to harness those signals, measure that intent, and actually produce a piece of content that is going to be needed to respond to that consumer in real time? How do you think about your creative, right? Not just optimize for the first screen, but optimize for the intent that the consumer is giving you. How do you think about your landing pages and build a future-proof framework that is dynamic and elastic and can respond to all of these things? And how do you think about measurement too? Because measuring is tough in an environment that actively suppresses PII and relies on very different points of technology and tracking in order to identify who the consumer is. We're not talking about cookies. We're not talking about post-login environments. We're talking about device IDs and sometimes not even that. And I'd argue that the measurement part is actually really, really important, not just to measure who is coming in through your front door, who you're acquiring, but also measuring what people are doing within your apps, in your mobile environment, and understand from that if they're actually satisfied and are going to continue to be a customer, or if they're about to churn, if they're about to bounce off. Fetch has done a study just now, and we're about to publish it, specifically for the subscription and mobile or subscription and streaming economy, but I would argue this applies to all verticals that are represented in this room. That tells us that consumers expect proactive communications from brands before they're about to cancel or switch services. And they would like to see personalized content and personalized features surface to them proactively so that they don't actually switch services, right? This is important. Acquiring customers is important. Retaining them is equally as vital. So that's the theoretical. Let's bring it back down to earth and talk about our own lives for a second. I'm going to ask you guys another question. How many of you have found yourselves in a store with your phone out, comparing prices, reading reviews, or actually exploring some sort of product features about a product you're about to buy, right? Like we all do this. We all want to make an educated decision, not overpay, pick the right product. I did this a couple of months ago. I decided that I needed an espresso machine. Actually, no one needs an espresso machine. I decided I wanted an espresso machine. So I walked over to the local store, and I thought that I knew everything I needed to know in order to make that decision. And I realized after being presented with all of these choices, an actual picture that I took, that I didn't know anything, and I needed to be better informed in order to buy a piece of equipment that was going to cost me a few $100. And so what did I do? I did what most of you did, right? I pulled this guy out. And I started learning really quickly on the spot. I was on YouTube looking at tips from baristas and the videos that they were posting. I was reading a few blogs to see what people were suggesting I should buy. And I also know that I have a friend in Dubai in a different time zone who actually specializes in this stuff. And so I was messaging him through Facebook Messenger, asking for his opinions, and we ultimately connected through video, and I was showing him what I was looking at in order to make the right decision, right? Sounds pretty basic, sounds pretty normal, but what I was actually doing was I was throwing up intent signals. I was manifesting that I was in this need state, that I had a question that needed to be answered. I had money that I was willing to spend. I was in a location where I could actually spend the money, but I just needed help. And so these intent signals, they could be so powerful for us to make a decision from as far as marketers. It could be location, it could be a mobile search, it could be kinetic information that your phone is providing via their gyroscope and accelerometer data that could tell us whether you're actively pursuing something or you're in a lean back mode, passively consuming information. All of these are very important things to understand. Harness, normalize, and then action off of. And so what does this look in the example I brought up about buying an espresso machine? Well, let's simplify this a little bit. It doesn't have to be super complex. If you know that I've already researched how to make coffee before and how to choose an espresso machine, because we've met online. We've met through me doing some searches on Google while I was at home or whatever. And all of a sudden, I'm in a retail environment, and I'm still pulling my mobile phone out. What does it say about me? What does it say about my need state? Well, it probably means that I need to compare prices and be comfortable with the choice I'm about to make. Maybe I need to see more options than what I'm being presented with at that particular store. And so acknowledge that. Tell me, shop now, and take me to an environment where I have more choices than what is presented in front of me, right? I can stand there and compare and make my own decision, and I may actually still buy from the store I'm physically in, but at least you've served me the most relevant, timely, needed piece of advice and content that I needed to see. Versus if I'm still in that research mode, I might be at home, I might be lying down on my couch, or I might be in my office briefly researching this stuff, and I'm still consuming content about how to make that perfect cup of coffee. Well, serve me an ad that acknowledges this in the environment that I am currently in, and then take me to a landing page and experience that shows me how to make that decision instead of forcing me into a buy stream. And you can adjust this based on the time of day. You know, if you know that I'm relaxed and I have plenty of time, make the content longer. If you know that I'm in a rush because I'm consuming this while I'm commuting, make the content shorter. We have all the tools in our disposal to be able to make those decisions and recognize them. Dana's going to talk about this in a bit.
Yeah, so as we talked about yesterday and as Jeremy Hall mentioned, not only are we seeing a lot of mobile first marketing, but we're also seeing mobile only marketing. So a question that I have for you is raise your hand if you used your mobile device in order to travel here, whether it be on an airline app or a rideshare app. Absolutely. And then how many of you also brought your laptops with you because you're going to do some work? And then how many also brought your tablets with you because you want to consume some sort of entertainment, whether it's a movie or reading? Exactly. So not only are you bringing device with you, for one person, you've already bought 3 devices. Jeremy Hull mentioned it yesterday where he said in his household of 3 individuals, I think he said he had like 12 different devices. That's exactly what we're seeing today. So we need to be able to tailor to our consumers as well. They're expecting a seamless experience across all of those different devices, and we need to be able to tailor to that. And not only do we need to tailor to those devices, but we need to think about the need state. As Gosha mentioned, I am a busy working mom. I make food for my children every night. Sometimes it's pizza, sometimes it's not. But my need state is usually the same. I usually have tried to figure out what I'm going to feed my children. And so I'm doing that in different environments, whether it be on my mobile phone. I'm actually using that to scroll through, read through, and use Pinterest to look at all the different recipes that are out there. I might be looking at mommy blogs to understand what are the best dishes that I can hide vegetables in so that my children don't notice. And then I'm going to be doing deeper research, or I'm going to be referencing an actual recipe, and I'll use my tablet for that. I'll use that, set it up in my kitchen in order to actually consume the information right there, versus the need state in the moment advice. I have my Amazon Alexa also in the kitchen so that I can ask questions about, like, what am I supposed to set the oven temperature to? How can we use each of those different need elements for that same kind of challenge for that same consumer and be able to target that consumer and provide that compelling brand experience across those different devices? So what are those ingredients? We talked about it before. There are really 3 different things that you'll need to think about, and it doesn't have to be so complicated. You could think about it from a people, a process, and a technology standpoint. From a people standpoint, who are your UX experts? Who are your UX strategists that you have on staff, whether it be with iProspect or inside your own teams? How do you identify who those individuals are that are going to help you identify who are my consumers? How is my brand being represented? How can I understand more about how I can speak to them in these different devices? And then when you think about it from a process standpoint, when you talk with Drew and Doug, if you haven't already, they'll be able to talk with you about, from an analyst standpoint, that process is how do I create and identify all of those different touch points for the person? How do I know those signals that consumers are throwing up? Which ones are the most important for us to leverage across what devices? And analysts can really help you with that. And then thirdly, what is the technology? You have to be thinking about it flexibly. It's not just ads. It's not just how those ads are playing across devices, but it's also how you're looking at it both from a landing page and an e-com experience as well. And so bringing all of that together is one of those things where you're trying to identify how can I talk to my consumers across those different devices? How do I look at and identify what those signals are that they're throwing out so that I can use those and leverage them for all of the different things that we're trying to do? As Brittany mentioned yesterday, one of the big things that we see as marketers, one of our biggest challenges is how do we get them to that very last mile of the e-com experience, that landing page experience. It's not just the ad that we want to engage our consumers with, but it also drives into the landing pages that we have for them. So consistency is key. How do you drive that consistency all the way through? Some of the mistakes that we've seen from a mobile standpoint, we've seen that we've created a huge amount of scroll depth. There's a ton of content for consumers to consume on their mobile device. We'll see that consumers are taking a long time to load either an app or e-com experience or even an ad. We see 50% of consumers drop off after the first 3 seconds if you haven't loaded that actual experience for them. So we have to get away from thinking about it that way. And we have to be able to figure out how we can apply these mobile design rules to really create that mobile first experience. How can you reveal that brand very quickly, load very fast for consumers? Don't make people work to figure it out. The content should be right there. Provide that answer very immediately. Shop now, do this thing, buy this thing right now. Design for your sound being off. Your consumers, they want to engage with you. Maybe you're sitting in a meeting and you have an ad showing, or maybe they're commuting in a public transportation. You want to still be able to engage with those consumers wherever they are. Be concise, think about less is more. And as Gosha mentioned before, the unique capabilities of mobile. When Gosha was talking to me, when he was telling me about the accelerometer feature to be able to identify if a consumer is actually driving or if they're actually just laying back, that to me was really compelling, because I know that those are two different need states that I'm in a lot, whether I'm commuting and I need a need state right then, or if I'm just browsing, I'm sitting at my desk. And so those might be two different areas where you can use those unique capabilities. And then match that to what that landing page experience is. From a platform standpoint, we've seen that we need to have very fast load times on our sites. Think about how you can create a responsive design. As a marketer, you don't necessarily, and I think it adds a lot of complexity if you have both a mobile experience, which is separate from your tablet experience, which is separate from your desktop experience. How can you create one experience that's able to morph and change and adapt to the device that you're on? As well as how can you be modular and scalable? How can we bring content to the front when you're on that mobile device? Those are all key metrics to think about. These are just some of the signals that we've talked about before. Gosha was mentioning them, I've mentioned them before. There are a lot of different signals that consumers can throw out there for you. So how can we leverage those? One example that I would have is if you had a very time-specific device or a very time-specific offer that you wanted to show. I'm commuting home. I am a mile from the store that I normally go to every single day. If I'm able to identify that consumer and say, I know the time of day, I know you're driving, how can I tell them, hey, you usually stop by this grocery store. Why don't you stop by now? Because you might be forgetting something because it's midweek. Those are all great signals to be able to personalize for that consumer. From a subscription standpoint, if we're able to identify and leverage first-party signals as well, how do we know who those active subscribers are? Do we know that need state for that consumer? Is they're an expectant parent? Potentially they're browsing at home. How are we able to serve them up content that talks about the 5 things that you need to be thinking about as a new parent? That is compelling information as a brand that you can think about how you can provide that information to a consumer. So 2 examples of work that we've done recently. One of them is yesterday you heard on the main stage, Stephanie talked about Adtalem. Adtalem, one of the brands underneath Adtalem is Chamberlain College of Nursing. And so one of the things that we identified with this particular use case, we actually built out, we do both from a media standpoint, but also the landing pages, we've created that seamless experience for consumers. And so one of the things that we identified is that the audiences for paid search were different than what we were seeing from social. That's probably a no-brainer to you. But what we were identifying is that when we had individuals that were in paid search, they were individuals that knew they wanted to be nurses. So our main goal there was to say, why do you want to go to Chamberlain College of Nursing? What were the connections that we could make with that consumer, with that brand, to be able to say, not only do you want to be a nurse, you want to be a nurse here. And so one of the things that we have identified is creating that connection. So we created imagery and content that really focused on that nurse to patient relationship, and that was a really compelling experience for them. Whereas with social, one of the things that we have identified there is looking at it from a consumer standpoint. They were looking more at, not necessarily do I want to be a nurse, they just didn't know what they wanted to be. And so how can we identify those consumers and say, it's not necessarily about being a nurse, but it's that sense of accomplishment of getting your degree. And how can we use that content and that kind of imagery to be able to speak to those consumers? And in both cases, we saw a lift. For both for paid social and for paid SEM, we saw a 20 or 30% lift for both of those. And when I say lift, I'm not talking about just filling out the form. I actually mean turning into enrolled students. So we were able to create this compelling connection with consumers to be able to not only sign up, but also become enrolled. Cox Communications, you'll hear from later on today. We actually manage their mobile site as well. They were seeing a 50% increase in the number of traffic coming to their mobile site, but they were seeing a huge drop off at the first step in their e-com experience. So we tailored that experience to use very specific iconography. We lessened the amount of scroll depth that they had. We created more filters on the site to be able to really provide that compelling experience. So as we near the end of the session today, you probably are already thinking about pulling out your phones. If you are, think about, as we've talked about today, some of those design principles that you've seen and some of the things that where marketers are doing it well and where they should speak to you better.